Okay.
Now, all right, I want to go back to what we were talking about before. So I usually don't talk about movies on the show a whole lot unless it's used for a subject, but I don't like to focus on movie reviews. But I saw Joker, and I thought this was a great thing that you had to see, because I think with the crime writing and all that, you probably like the perspectives on a lot of these situations there too. And I think this is why the world's fascinated with serial killer shows. And surprisingly, the Joker movie, I thought it did a very, very good job, was incredible. I mean, I'm still ranting about it. It's been like, it's only been like 2 days since I've seen it, but I was the last person to see it. It's like, I've never seen John Wick. Everyone's seen it, but it's that perspective that I really enjoyed. And people are like, this is a right wing political making machine. This is horrible. This is all about supporting police. And this is why they need to take us down. And I'm like, what the hell did you guys pull from the movie that I didn't pull from it? If anything, I can understand like the creating of a serial killer, but I thought it gave a perspective on something a lot of people don't see. And that's the side from not really an underdog, but someone who's been beaten and kicked down. And we always just see the ending product of a lot of these situations.
Mm-hmm. I haven't seen John Wick either, so you're not alone there. So I haven't seen it, although I love Keanu Reeves. We saw Joker in the cinema, I think, pre-COVID. I'm trying to remember, so I reckon, yeah, you're probably the last one to see it. And it was a very interesting tale. And I'm just wondering what way would the Joker's life had gone had he been shown compassion. You know, had he been shown, had he been shown understanding, compassion from his colleagues at the time, and just in his different interactions, you can see the build-up. I know we don't want to do any spoilers, but you can see the build-up, which led itself to his perspective and his mindset, and he did the act. But you know, you can see how society as well could have done something, and it failed him to a point, you know. But yeah, I don't know what those people got out of it. I just see it as a film.
I think it shows an important part of like mental health. I've talked to a lot of historians and anthropology people, and I've really talked about this. And even some ex Jehovah's Witnesses and people that have gotten out of like cults and stuff. And they always talk about like this identity crisis. And I think everyone in their life everyone in their life has a turning point of when they need to be a person and when they need to start discovering out on their own. A child, for instance, becoming 18 or becoming 21 has to understand his relationship with alcohol, has to understand the relationship. And I think it can go badly depending on what type of small little thing can get dabbled in the mix. And I think with like the Joker, for instance, it was not only the essence of just being a good person, of trying to show like what happens if you really hurt somebody and how far someone can be pushed to the point of breaking. But I think it shows the best representation of what real mental health is. Now, depression is mental health. No one's saying it's not, but schizophrenia, things that we don't understand, that we really can't even fathom. I mean, I've read documentaries upon documentaries for psychology classes to be able to understand what schizophrenia was, but it's this reality that we all create. You know, sometimes I think of like this reality. Am I really like good at talking, or am I like drooling and people are just acknowledging the things that I'm saying, you know? And the reality that we all live in is that murder is bad. Drugs are bad. Certain drugs are now becoming legal, but I think our reality changes and everyone's reality is a little bit different. But the one that we have over accumulated or over kind of agreed on is the one that is acceptable in society's standards. For instance, killings. There are justified killings. People talk about like, what do you mean by a justified killing? A justified killing would be an example of the guy who shot the man point blank range in an airport because the guy was getting free of charges of literally molesting the dude's son. He was a coach at a school. Everyone, even the cops, when they tackled the guy to the ground, you could see him like pick him up and then like pat him, like, you know, like, hey, you know, because everyone understood that this person did a horrible act and he was about to be just scot-free, all because of a slip up in the court system. I don't want the father to feel the need to put that decision in his hands to avenge his son for all this type of scarring that emotionally traumatized this boy. But that is what people look at like, it's not something people are going to be protesting and rioting in the streets about. You know what I mean?
I wonder, have you seen the film A Time to Kill? who's in it? Matthew McConaughey and I can't think of the other actors on it. And it's actually a fictional film based around the defense lawyer. The guy turns up at the court, and a guy gets off from a horrendous crime, and he murders someone inside in the court. The guy coming out, I don't want to ruin it, but that's a lot around that subject, you see. You see, as a, I suppose, as a police officer, and and upholding the law and adhering to the law, I have to respect the court process and all that. And there are cases here in Ireland, and different things, and you have to tick all those boxes. Files have to be on, the investigation has to be done well, and there's a certain protocol follow and different things. So, I mean, the only justifiable homicide in Irish law are falling under specific determinations. So that is where we're in Ireland. That's the way it looks. It's what's within the law and what's not within the law. There has been cases where the DPP has appealed sentences and appealed different things and brought issues back to court. So there has that, following that line of investigation and determination. That's the way the protocol goes here.
I think what gets me is it's very, very hard to step down from your own reality to be able to understand someone else's. And I think what is very, like, for instance, when watching the Joker movie, when I'm seeing him dance after he kills somebody and just have like this symphony go on in his head, a lot of people be like, he's a psycho. Now, in reality, in normalized, I'm like, that's a psycho, is some person that is hearing these things. There's something mentally wrong. But I've been high before, and I've just randomly started dancing and like singing because I was so stoned out of my mind, to where I didn't understand, because that was my reality now. That felt like a normal thing to do. And now looking back on it, I'm like, I can't believe I fucking did that. Thank God nobody saw me, but instead I'm going to say it on a podcast. But this is like, that's the reality. I think we all do something that we think is normal that a lot of people might find weird, even if it's eating a different food. Now, who's to say you can't just broad brush that into a larger grand scheme of things when it comes to the way that somebody acts? I'm not justifying a kill, but I'm justifying a situation where you need to really look at the perspective of something. Like, for instance, that's the most important thing, is a perspective. There's a kind of like, it was a slew of murders back in, I don't know if it was Ireland or Scotland back in the day, but it was like 18 something. It was the Bjork and Hare murders. Are you familiar with those?
Yeah, Scotland. It would have been Glasgow, I think.
Yeah.
And they were the guys who robbed the graves.
Yeah, they were robbing
For the
graves
purpose of the cadavers to
sell to the
perform
school.
Postmortems, on the selling to the school,
And eventually they started actually murdering people, where people were like, whoa, there's like, this dude's missing. Like, where did this person find this body? And they started realizing that these brothers were doing like a slew. And it was just because it was harder to rob graves. I mean, the whole grave robbing era, people don't understand the sketchy history behind death. Death is now at a point where, we look at it like we don't want anybody to die. But they used to sell fucking caskets in Costco. And that's a grocery store where you get all your bulk peanut butter and Nutella or whatever you want. But you can also buy a casket for your loved one. And death has always been prophetized. It has always been in this kind of thing. But there was a sketchy era of time where people were literally digging up their loved ones in fear that someone else was going to dig up their loved ones and then mess with their loved ones' remains or steal their objects. Eventually got to the point where people were taking giant steel cages and locking the coffins up, in these giant steel metal cages, that where people were like, oh, it's anti-zombie protection. I'm like, no, that was because people were robbing other people's graves. And I think this is the reality we're in. This reality, I mean, to say that in the future, it's not the reason why, like, people look at like today's times and like they look at the past like, oh my God, it's such a horror. It's like, yeah, because this reality that we're in is now different than the reality we were in 10 years ago. I think these are all the influences that we have around us. And I think these perspectives that we are having right now, I don't know if they're necessarily our natural perspectives. I think these are influenced by the ideas that we have around them. And I think that's what like really kind of caught my attention when I was watching the Joker movie, was that the perspective of this movie for
Perspective,
me,
yeah,
I was like, it's
absolutely,
relatable.
yeah.
And then my buddy was like, well, if it's relatable, that's not good because that means you're relating to this psychopath. And I'm like, yeah, but I think it's just the concept of like, if you really truly understand how everybody's mind thinks individually different, then you can really understand how this person might not even be a bad guy, but it's just been pushed to a point where his mind is literally broken. And what we see as something that needs to be fixed, he sees as everything that he lives every single day. I mean, you probably have a body ache or something or a pain that you're so used to, you don't even remember that that's not normal. It's just always there every single day where it becomes a normal thing. And that's the same thing with our minds.
Yeah, absolutely. Perspective is it, and just on the Burke and Hare thing, I think families hired um people to look after graves after when they were still fresh, to ensure there was no grave robbing. But you're right, the perspective is your perspective and my perspective. It's like we've all autonomy over our own minds. We were talking about this, I think, at the last session as well, that we could be talking about the same thing, but our minds be thinking different things and going off in different directions and different perspectives. And that's why perspectives need to be clear. And that's why you have to sit back and you have to understand different people's perspectives on different things. And I know what you're saying. So his perspective, the Joker's perspective, looking back when he performed that, when he carried out that crime and being high and dancing around the place, it was just his perspective, his thought, the way he saw it in that moment. And it's like perspectives at anything. We're also different, and this is the understanding. And it's back then to compassion again, and empathy and understanding, and all that's surrounding. I mean, we're both waking up. I'm waking up in Ireland. You're waking up in America. You're like, it's a Monday. Is my Monday the same as your Monday? Our Mondays are different. Our Tuesdays are going to be different. We're going to be different in the next hour. It's really, we're all living unique lives, and it's back to that compassion. It's back to that mindfulness. Back to what is our reality and what's our present moment and what's our perspective. And the line of movies, I'm thinking of the Matrix. What Matrix are we in? Have you seen the Matrix movies?
No. No, I haven't. I fell asleep in one of them, and it's like when you fall asleep, wake up 10 minutes later, then you fall asleep again, you keep falling asleep and waking up. I did it like 6 or 7 times where that movie feels like it's 50 years long, and I don't ever want to watch it again.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but it is a really interesting analogy to life and fear. And which pill do you take? Do you take the one and discover a new reality? Do you take one, stay the same? And it's like, and I find in coaching and stuff like that, it's actually a good example to show, like, are you stepping into the matrix of the unknown, or are you going to stay the same, but something isn't right?
I
I mean, and
I think with this Joker movie, it just got me to a point where I was trying to look at serial killers, for instance. Now I've studied Charles Manson. I've went deeply into that. Actually, there's a book you should read by Tom O'Neill. He actually spent 20 years researching the whole Manson investigation and actually came out and got information in articles that were by the government that the government actually was drugging Charles Manson. So there was a big movement back in time called the anti-hippie movement, which this anti-hippie movement was that these government people would dress up as hippies, go into these hippie protests or festivals or whatever they want to call it, where they were smoking weed, and they would put drugs in their drinks, like LSD and all these crazy, like basically roofies in these people's drinks. And these
Mhm.
hippies would wake up in like grocery stores after like hours when it's closed, broken through the window, like a bunch of crazy things. Murders, for instance, were happening as well too. And then this became this giant increase to ban these drugs and ban these hippies, call it the anti-hippie movement, because these hippies were taking drugs and killing people. Wasn't true. It was all a ploy of the government. Now with Charles Manson, for instance, he was going to prison and then being, or not prison, jail, then being let out like an hour later after being accused of a killing. That doesn't happen. There was a bunch of random sketchy things. For instance, someone had paid him a large amount of money to go to San Fran or someplace in Mexico where he was able to survey land. Now, he wasn't a geological surveyor, but he was able to go do that while on probation. I don't know any probation officer that lets somebody go like 4 or 5 states away or out of the country, for instance. You know what I mean? So there was a lot of things that he was noticing that were lined up. Eventually, after 20 years of freaking research, wrote a book on it, but he was slowly getting articles and information showing that the government, all these mind control experiments linked with MK Ultra, that caused this guy to do these acts. Same thing with the Unabomber. That dude was institutionalized from when he was a child, and the government were, there's been known things of his family members talking about how the government would play these weird sounds and clicks and vibrations and inject him with random like serums and all these types of things to literally make him go crazy, where he ended up mailing all these packages to people, random airports and businesses, and cause these types of things. I'm like, man, there's a fascination with MK Ultra in general, but the way, the capacity to mess up your mind and not know the consequences of doing so. And I think this is stuff that you see on a daily basis. For 1 hour, me and you right now are linked onto one conversational flow or vibe or energy.
Mhm.
But the rest of the day, we will be thinking completely different things because we're not
Mhm.
talking to each other and we're not honing in on the same thing. And that just shows the power of conversation. But the grand
Mhm.
aspect of what could encounter into our lives and what could then be the outcome of that experience is something that I am truly interested in.
I haven't heard of MK Ultra. And I haven't read that
What?
about
That's the
Charles.
that's the
No,
biggest brainwashing government mind control experiment. I can read it to you if you want me to.
I look it up. Is there a definition? I'm writing it down here
It's
now.
literally called Project MK Ultra. Like this
Okay.
was Canada. I so the best story I've ever heard out of it was and you can look at the articles on the CIA
Mhm.
website. A lot of them are redacted, so they don't they hide a lot of the people's names. But one of the most famous people was a Canadian scientist who actually they would do like auditory hallucinations and things like that. So they would put headphones over your ears and they would put like blindfold on your eyes, and then they would play these like random like sounds and clicks, and this is what leads into sleeper agents, which sleeper agents are just undercover government workers that are brainwashed, that like they could just play a certain song and then you slip into this thing and not remember you did anything. um
Mhm.
MK Ultra, the best story I've ever heard was a guy that was talked about. He would lay in a like a hole in the ground, like you would put a body in, and he would cross his arms, and they'd have headphones on his head and things over his eyes, and they would just slowly dump in snakes into the hole that he was in, and they would test to see how much like would you freak out, would you do all these things. That's what they would do in these government projects, and it actually leads to Charles Manson, a guy who was the therapist for Charles Manson, was the same therapist for the guy who shot JFK. And they started to realize that, you know, how when your brain smells something like a certain thing, it brings back a memory. They actually found a drug that was mixed with like some type of phosphate that they can inject into you, and it causes your brain to forget. And this was like a government thing that they were using on people during war times and everything. It's not that we're not the only country that's ever done that. Other countries have done it too. But
Mhm.
this therapist guy, like there's a story about like a guy who worked at an Air Force base would get these ringing headaches. And he went to this therapist at the Air Force base, which is the same therapist for Manson and the guy who shot JFK. And he would dip his like hands in weird water and like these things, play these random clicks, give him all these drugs. And next thing you know, he talked about how he woke up covered in blood. Now, apparently, this guy who was went to jail for this woke up in a puddle of blood with scratches and bite marks on him, and a little girl was missing. Turns out he actually killed the little girl and doesn't remember a single thing about it. And then also did a whole bunch of other stuff with the body afterwards. Now, he doesn't remember any of this. And I don't know if that he's lying. They've proven that he's 100% telling the truth, but they're starting to realize that this guy was drugging people back in the day, which ended up leading into this anti-hippie movement. And I'm like, this just shows you the fuck. I get it. The mind is fascinating, but to do that to someone and see how far you can push somebody's mind until they break, that's not unknown. That's very known.
But then you'd wonder is how much of it was the person capable of deep down? You know, you'd
I
wonder,
think
did
we're all
that drug
capable.
reach into that, perhaps a desire, perhaps an urge, perhaps a need to commit such a heinous crime that it just opened up the possibilities. And I look at it from the point of view of how much is it kind of negating your responsibility around it, how much is it? Maybe, this, there's a lot of culture is that nothing is ever my fault, when, when people are experiencing things that they're clearly wrong, and certain situations. I've gone to calls, and just minor things like traffic accidents, and someone always know who did the wrong thing. Someone always knows. So I'm wondering how much there, did it did it unlock a capability or desire that was already there? And from the point of view of writing crime and everything, I mean, the well of possibilities is absolutely endless. Was it the associative personality disorder and all those different things? You'd wonder, like, there is such a huge well of possibilities, but then when you look at, peel it back to motivation, and motivations, and same in character in the book. What are their motivations? What's the story arc? What did they learn? Was it? So I'm just wondering then, how deep was the desire originally for this drug to reach in? But I must read up about it.
I'll have to send you some of those. It's MK Ultra's one, and then look up Tom O'Neill. I'll send you the podcast he was on. It completely just blew my mind, because my buddy highlighted this to me. There was a old TV show called Nickelodeon, and there's a TV network. It was like a kids network.
Kids
Now,
Network.
a lot of the child stars have horrible accounts that have just came out recently about the crazy conditions they were put in. Now, so mostly any kid my age that watched Nickelodeon or Disney or any of these networks, technically, you basically watched child pornography. Technically, because there, one of the girls who was on iCarly, not Miranda Cosgrove, but the other one, Sam, she was Sam on the show. They talked about how, like, the director, had a foot fetish. And I was like, well, I don't think I've ever saw any skits or any show parts that included feet.
Yeah.
No, they had a scene on one of the episodes where they stuck their feet in different forms of mashed potatoes. And then they literally chopped up a bunch of old TV show clips of just certain parts that this guy got charged with, and was, he got off on the charges, but literally showed you what they was being charged with, all these like child, like pornography type things. I was a kid when the show came out. I thought it was just funny stuff, but no, it was child pornography style things. That's not my fault, but that's something, is what I'm trying to say, is there's a perspective that we don't know the full information on yet. There was, during the pandemic, they decided to let some of these people that were locked up in jail out, because they were going to get sick with COVID. It was a giant thing. And they said, you need to get these people so they're not contaminating and infecting each other. They need to let the people out so they can have a chance to survive COVID. One of the dudes who was wrongfully in prison for killing somebody went and killed the dude that put him in prison. That wasn't, what are we like? So he might, would he have had that deep down inside of him? Sure. But what about that? That's a revenge thing. You know what I mean? Like, I start to look at, like, I think we all have something. I think we can all kill somebody. We all can accidentally do it. We can all change a perception in our head to do that. But what is the triggers that do that? That's what gets me. It's like, I bet you, if I pissed you off enough, you could easily break my head. But at the same time, what brings you to that point? You know what I'm saying? I'm like, so I'm not rationalizing killings, but it leads into like a bigger topic known as the Innocence Project, which are these group of people I highly recommend following on Instagram, Twitter, whatever their socials are. But they go and they find people who are wrongfully imprisoned, and they get them out of death row. They've saved a bunch of people on death row who are wrongfully tried, all because of, like, they were illegal immigrants or something like that. They could, in our law system, sadly, as good as it is, it's flawed in some ways, and in these some ways happens to be like blood splatter analysis. They've already proven that that's not an effective way of convicting someone of a crime anymore. Also, the match thing, like, here's a match, it started this fire. That only takes about a week course to do. It's an hour a day to do it for a week, and you end up getting your license for that. So they figure out that's not right. Lie detecting tests now have been proven that you can actually trick your brain into lying and actually coming out to be truthful. If you think, like, Maybe I did do that. I don't know. I don't remember. You can implant false memories, which leads into the MK Ultra thing. Is that's a known thing that they were trying to work on was imprinting false memories. Like I have a buddy that talks about. Remember when we went to go see Michael Jordan play basketball. I was like, "You've never been to a fucking basketball game." He goes, "What are you talking about?" I remember going, but he convinced himself and implanted this false memory into his head where he thinks he went to an actual basketball game, and he never did. I ended up telling him, "No, you've never been to this game." And after like I think it was like a week's worth of just telling him, "No, you didn't. No, you didn't." And he kept saying, "I think I did, man." He dreamt it. But he thought that was a legit memory. That's what I'm saying is that's what gets me. And I think as like a person who writes crime, that other perspective, trying to get into that mindset of how this person thinks that way. I thought this was like a perfect topic for you. Cause I was like, yo, like trying anybody that just watches a murder documentary, you're trying to understand how a person could get to this point, and then they show you everything that led him up to this point where he's like his mother used to beat him with shoes and that's why he's known as
Mhm.
the shoe killer. It's like, oh shit, I didn't even think of that. I just saw the ending results and I wanted this person to die.
But it's like what you said about the motivations there and revenge and different things, and depending on how passionate you are. But in the instant, in a moment, your emotional brain kicks in quicker than your logic. So your emotion will always kick in quicker than your logic brain. So in mindfulness, that teaches you to kind of hold it, just hold the moment, hold the moment. So if you can engage your mindfulness, you wouldn't um kick into a reactive. So that then tells the different proofs, whether a murder is premeditated or whether it is reactive manslaughter. Um, and but it does your reaction, your motivate, and if you're seething and building up like that guy in America, or sorry, in prison that was let out to prevent the COVID infection spread, and he was seeking revenge. The rumination that he had time to ruminate and plan and probably um, figure how he was going to do this, and then committed that murder. So then you're talking straightforward murder, premeditated. Um, but yeah, you have that instantaneous reaction. What would you do in a moment? What would you do in a moment of defense? What would you do if you had to defend your family, your house, your person? I mean,
It's like my
the
perspective on this girl that's been missing on Twitter that everyone became a fucking journalist or detective trying to find. You see that shit?
is that the YouTuber
I don't know what her name was. It's like
I
Penelope or
thought
something.
missing the canyon. I actually just caught up on that today. Is that their body found or something like that?
Yeah,
It's
they
really,
found her
really
in like a
sad.
national
Yeah.
park. That's really sad. But at the same time, every single person on Twitter became a fucking journalist or detective. And it's like, that's the word. That's my perception of it. Maybe the perception I should be having is, oh my God, look at all these people coming together to, try and find this girl. I think it's Petito is her last name. Rest in peace. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's a terrible thing. But I mean, literally over the past 2 weeks, this has been a trending
Yeah.
thing of people just getting entertainment out of this person that was
Oh
missing,
yeah,
trying to
that's
become a
that's
detective.
sick.
That's
Yeah,
the
that's a sick.
perception I got out of
Yeah.
it. Now, most people say, well, it was the world coming together to help find somebody. I was like, the best example I can give you is when I say somebody died of COVID, what pops into that person's head that always gets asked? Were they what or were they not?
Yeah, vaccinated. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What do we like? What do I don't know if it's the world, but like if somebody says somebody dies of COVID, ask me right now. Tell me somebody died of COVID. Just say it to me.
Yeah, we have had 1,200 we 1,200 cases yesterday,
Yeah,
and
but I
I
mean,
don't know the numbers, but two people probably died. I
but
don't know the exact numbers, but yeah.
but Marie, right now, tell me. Just say somebody died of COVID. Just say it.
Okay, somebody died of COVID.
Okay, that's terrible. I pray for their family. That's it. But everything you say now, everyone leads into were they vaxxed? Were they unvaxxed? Were they? I'm like, why are you a fucking journalist? What are we talking about here? It's a person is gone. And that's the thing is like, I think this is a weird time in society where our perception starts to change on things. Is now the real common issue that a life is gone has now conducted into this weird era where people are trying to get all the facts, like there's CNN or some type
Yes.
of news source. And I'm like, I don't think that's anybody's job, but the person who's qualified to do that role.
And it's the victim blaming. It's the girl walking home at night that might get mugged. Why was she walking home on her own? Why, what did she do to contribute? There's all that going on. There's a lot of narrative around that. There was the survey just came out today about 1 in 3 women walking home on their own feel have been harassed or followed or felt like they were followed. That actually only came out today here in Ireland. But it's a lot of victim blaming, and I see it then when police, the guards here in Ireland is trending, and everyone has an opinion, and everyone, why didn't they do it this way? Why didn't you do it that way? Why wasn't it done this way? And why? And people filming and just giving an opinion and having a say. It's like the social media, like there are a certain percentage of idiots on social media, and there's a certain percentage of idiots in the world, and social media has given a certain percentage of those idiots a voice, and they're using their voice idiotically, and for non-constructive reasons.
I'm trying not to. I'm trying.
Try. But it's like it's all this, okay, I have an opinion and that's it, and mine is valid, and there's this cancel culture, and there's this it's like nobody else has an opinion, and people are not listening to one another. They're not listening, and they're taking points out of the way people are saying a thing or people's opinions, and they're taking a certain perspective on it again. And
I feel like you're attacking me personally.
Not at all. But we'll say I'm talking about a situation where we were talking about cancel culture the last time, weren't we? Yeah. So it's like it's like people aren't listening to one another's points anymore. It's obviously if someone is blatantly coming out with something bigoted or racist or misogynistic, it's clear, but if someone takes someone's opinion and rewrites the narrative to suit their own opinion for the purpose of canceling the person, that's a whole different operation altogether.
It's no different from somebody can read something in your book and then be offended by something and then want to take you down for it. I think it's just the best example I've discovered with it is that like it's kind of like with the mask thing. Like you'll see someone not wearing one, and then in your head you'll build up like much like a job interview of like when you prep to go to a job interview. Okay, he's going to ask me this. I need to answer with this. You do your own speech in your mirror for like 30 minutes before you go to your job interview thing. Well, with the mask thing, you have this fight in your head that goes this one way for 30 minutes in your head. Like, what happens if he says no? Then I have to go like this and this and this and this. And then you think of these, your brain starts going off on this fork. And then when you meet the person, you're like, put your goddamn mask on. They're like, okay. And you're like, I wasn't expecting you to give me that answer. I had this whole fight in my head for 30 minutes. Like, no, I'll put it on. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. And then they put it on. I think everyone's ramped up to 10 because they have these battles and they have this own kind of reality playing in their head, much like a movie. And I think it's the same thing with driving. People aren't naturally supposed to be aggressive driving, but your brain is subconsciously remembering you're in a car and you can actually die at any moment if someone makes a slip up. So when someone isn't following the rules, you freak out because that could be your life potentially lost. Your brain doesn't think that because we've just gotten so used to driving in cars for so long, but everyone's always ramped up. You would think people spend 30 years driving. Okay, well, they're still at level 10 when somebody cuts them off. And it's not they're angry in life. It's just because they're subconsciously not thinking about the fact that they're in a moving vehicle. And at any moment you sign this agreement that you could lose your life.
And the person that cut them off could have just been as easily pissed off with them. And that is, I think it's assuming, this is back to the assuming negative intent versus assuming positive intent. And it's like what you said about the guy approaching the person that has the mask. By the time they're so ramped up that when they get a non-confrontational response, it completely throws them, because the assumption is that you're ramped for confrontation. And when you're ramped for confrontation and you don't get that, you're left there with all this ramped up, what do you do with it? And it's a bit like being angry at someone. It's a bit like swallowing poison and hoping someone else will die. It's like you've all this anger in you, and because you've approached that, and because you've approached it with, we'll say, assuming negative intent as opposed to assuming positive intent, and it's destructive. It's just self-destructive,
I think the world's gotten to a point where people are trying to look for facts, and if they can't find facts, then they're trying to look for just something to entertain them. And by entertainment happens to be something mindless where they're not hearing anybody talk, they're just watching things happen. Like I'll watch videos of people getting hit by trains. I don't know why. It's just fucking fascinating to me. They don't die or anything. They're in a car and they hit a train and then this train does a spin and I'm like, holy shit, that's what happens when an object meets another object moving at a faster pace. Um, but it's entertaining. But then a lot of times, like I listen to podcasts that'll just be talking like scientists talking and speculating through their research and things of that sort. And I think the platform I've created is just one where somebody right now could be listening, be like, I don't agree with anything what they're saying. Okay, you can.
It's
That's
fine.
that's the
That's
fucking
your
point.
right.
This
Exactly.
is a
Yeah.
conversation show. You know how many times I've come
Yeah.
across somebody that goes, "Well, I don't like to speculate." Well, that's the point. It's like when someone comes on here and they go, I have a story for you, but I'll shorten it. I'm like, don't, I got a fucking hour to fill. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm
Give me the whole 9 yards. Yeah.
like, I like to hear the thoughts about things because I think thoughts are probably the most important thing out there, but we've kept them away like dirty little secrets in the fear that
Yeah.
that they are going to offend somebody. I think you know
Yeah.
what's offensive. You know, if you say somebody's this, you understand that's offensive. But having a thought shouldn't be something that you fear or something that you should be keeping locked
Mm.
away. I think it opens up the realm for understanding and trying to see the perspective of the person who has that initial thought created. But I might also be an asshole. I don't know.
And it's like the pylon culture, we'll say, on certain social media sites. You you know, you give out an opinion. Oh, I prefer oranges over lemons or oranges over apples, but and then you've all the 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 apple protesters, as in, what about apples? What about the red ones? What about the yellow ones? You're offending them. You know what I mean? And it's like people are so afraid to express their opinion because of offending someone. And it's not just that someone is offended, but they will tell you how they're offended, how they're deeply offended, and how all their friends are offended, and how this is making them feel. And like, you know, you end up with a skewed reality of what the original context of the conversation was, or the original point was. And then you have, you know, one side, there's always three sides to every story. So if someone comes in, it came into me at the desk if I was working, and this happened, this person said this, and this person, there's always the one in the part in the middle that's the truth. So, you know, but because they believe they're so right, one side so right is their perspective, and it's their perspective on how they've seen it. No two witness statements are ever going to be the same because of how they saw the incident or how they believed they saw it. There are certain core facts that will be the same, like, you know, someone wearing a black jumper or white jumper or red jumper, but the perspective on how it unfolded, you know, is going to be different. So like if you have two witnesses with mirror image statements, you're more likely going, hang on a second, that's not right. So I mean, the space for allowing different perspectives seems to have gotten more narrow, you know, and it's kind of, you either look at a thing from this point of view or that point of view. And if you don't, I'm no longer your friend. Or if you don't agree with me, then we can't be friends. You can. And I think in Ireland, you know, differences of opinions and supporting different teams or political affiliations or whatever, you know, usually it's you know, you can be in the company of people you don't agree with. You know, there's banter and crack and, you know, slagging going on. And but in some parts of the world, it's gone so that, you know, the non-agreement thing is a deal breaker. It's a deal breaker for friendships.
I think it's the fast-paced society we're in today. That's just a
Mhm.
thought of mine, but I mean, there's a lot of like people grinding and trying to move as fast as they possibly can to get the work done in the quickest amount of time, so they don't have to worry about wasting any time not getting to the point that they need to be at. And I think that's the same thing with conversations. If somebody says something to you that you don't agree with, you see it like I've seen how this turns out, so I might as well just cut it off now and then just walk away.
Mm.
And that's kind of like what we see instead. Maybe that I think it's because our brain tries to find and predict the next pathway of where this is going to go. I think we're right now, as we're talking, we're probably thinking about what we're going to do afterwards. And it's because our brain is trying to process our life in such a way where it's planning and it's making outcomes. It's not being 100% in the moment. And I think that's the same thing with conversations. If I tell you, hey, do you like Pepsi or do you want to go to the movies? You're already thinking, okay, then what movie do I want to go see? And necessarily, I probably don't want to see the movie that you want to see unless there's like a murder film in there. I'll
Mm.
watch. Maybe we should go see John Wick if we haven't seen it. Um,
That's it. Yeah.
but that's how people's brains work, is that they look in conversations, they look in things, and when they have a conversation or when they have a talking point or something or a side or something that they're trying to get out there, they look to see if the certain things that line up with their perspective. And if it doesn't line up, then they just like, oh, I see how this is going to end. It's going to be a waste of my time. Cut it out. And then when they cut it out,
Mhm.
that might not necessarily go out like they thought it was going to go in their head, but they're using predictive planning based on past information. Same thing with court cases. If they see a guy found with a knife and somebody's dead, they're most of the time thinking it's going to be him, but they're also going to look at the same kind of things they found in other historical or cases, things that they've done in the past to be able to predict the future. Doctors do the same things. You got a headache? Okay, most common headache I've seen recently has been this type of headache. It might be this one. I'm going to prescribe you this. Find out the dude has a rare tumor. That just threw a fucking monkey wrench into your thing where you don't know anymore. But that's the whole how the world works, is trying to be ahead of the game, and it's not necessarily playing the game anymore. You know what I mean?
And people are exhausted from it.
It's
It's
exhausting.
it's exhausting, and like that is why me as a coach, that is what I like. When people come to me for their hour and they're trying to find what's missing and what balances it needs to be rebalanced, it is in that moment where your soul focuses on them. You are in the moment. Your listening skills are honed, and you're looking for clues within that conversation to pick up from them. What within them can they do to help themselves? So and that is making them stop and being there, and that's the mindfulness I do as well. People are just absolutely exhausted, and just it's interesting with investigations. Like if you go into an interview room, it's not to get a confession; it's to get an answer or a picture or build up of what occurred. That is what you do, and what you go into a thing with a mindset. When I go into a coaching session, I am going in to find an answer, and I have to trust that that answer is in the room. I need do very little prep going in. I need not know anyone from a surgeon to a politician to a business owner to a person wanting to um, learn to play basketball can come into me. I need never know about their background, their profession, because I'm coaching them. So just by listening to the answer, I trust that the answer is in the room. And it's just like conversations. If your past experience, will say, of conversing with someone has led down a road where, you're ending up in this big debate or something, it's not a relaxed conversation, you come away, how do you feel when you come away from that conversation? If you're coming away from that conversation exhausted or
Angry.
annoyed or angry, why would you put yourself through that again? I mean, if you can just do a back and forward, like we're doing our own opinions, whether we agree, whether we've differing opinions, and just know that, like, there are no concepts. We're conversing. We're in the hour we're in, and how we're chatting, and that is not exhausting. That is not being in that moment or trying to predict the trajectory of the conversation. I mean, there's no, like, it used to be, are you free to talk? There's no, like, I've done interviews where there's been a lot of prep, and a lot of prerequisite, because
Sorry, I
it was
don't have any of that.
no, but the subject is honed to such a point where you have to stick to the points. Like when I talk about empathy and inclusion and diversity, the conversation has to round around to empathy, inclusion, and diversity. When I'm talking, and that in a post-pandemic workplace, that's one a talk I did in LinkedIn recently. There's another one on the was the other one I did, like that, yeah, all around empathy and about compassion, and compassion being empathy in action. So the core subjects of those you know, our core subjects are, well, see where this conversation goes. I mean, we've talked about work and hair and, you know, to the Joker and the whole. So it's just, it's a case of, and if you're sitting in someone's company and you know that within, we'll say the 6 years sitting down chatting, one is just going to rant and rave about a particular aspect of something topical and take over the whole conversation, where everyone's just sitting there going, Jesus Christ, or there, shut up. You know, you're going to avoid that situation or try and lessen the impact that's going to have in you, or the negativity that's going to have in you. But like if you're going into a conversation where there's no predetermined subject, and you know the last time you came away from that you felt, God, I could have stayed talking, or God, there was so much more we could have spoken about, there, you know, there are different aspects we could explore and different things, then you know that conversation is good. You're going to look forward to chatting to the person again, and you know the people in your life that give you energy or drain your energy, you know. And which would you rather? Life's too short. But people definitely need to slow down. What are they racing to? It's finite thinking. The only finite thinking is death. I mean, you know, the infinite thinking, the cycle, and what are people racing towards? You know, so, you know, people are exhausted. No wonder.
Yeah, if you ask me how I feel right now, I would say I feel like OJ.
Okay.
You ever see his Twitter where he goes, "Hello, Twitter world"? He's always so positive. And then all the comments on his videos, because he does like fantasy football like videos where he goes, "Hello, Twitter world, my Broncos aren't looking good," but it's fantasy football. It's not real football, so it's like less than caring, I guess. And people comment and they're like, "Murderer, murderer," and then there's like knife emojis, and then they put up like one person like, "Hey, how's Cheryl doing?" Like something about his like daughter or something like that. Um, it's crazy to me because that's someone who went through a trial, went through a court, went through a public where I think most of the population has agreed that he is a killer, and he's on Twitter where you can just find him. It's like when I look at like this mafia podcast with like old like school like vintage gang members, and they just talk about everything from back in the day. I'm like, the way they talk about it though is not how you would think. Like they look at it like if they were involved in the mafia or like the gang style stuff, they look at it like military experience. Like you listen to a podcast about military people, right? Well, they're murderers. What I was doing was my job. That was the task at hand. It wasn't killing, it was a job. And I was like, that's crazy to me to look at that, because I would just it's just mind-boggling. It's like you're trying to understand their view of things. And it's like I think it's the sales pitch of the way that they are sold it. There are people
And
that
yeah,
yeah, but there are people that'll do things
yeah,
and that you know are bad, but they don't know because they've been indoctrinated into something that is now their
yeah.
reality is different from the one that we all agree upon.
And it's strange how accessible these people are now, as you said, like, you know, on Twitter and able to engage and different things. And it's the
OJ still doesn't have
accessibility.
a check mark though. They ain't giving him that. They're like, hell no, you ain't getting a check mark. You can get it taken away from you too. I had no idea about that. I mean, it makes sense, but Jesus.
Oh, I didn't even bother looking for one. Yeah. I
They
had
can
nothing
take it
in with
away
that
from
one. But
you if they do not like what you say. So if you're like, they're
okay.
not going to give OJ a check mark, even though everyone knows that's OJ because they don't like what he did. So it's not even the goal of it is to verify who you are as a person, but subconsciously that check mark is appealing for a lot of people because it's verification of something. And I know a lot of people might say, I don't really care about it, but you have to admit your profile would be better for a viewing or audience aspect if it had a check mark. It's something about that check. It's a little symbol, but it makes people like, oh, well, they must be a good follow. And then they click the follow. And that's so weird to me. I'm like, you got it programmed. It's like seeing shiny keys for a child, and the child just loses his mind. Even I lose my mind at a good pair of shiny keys. I'm like, I don't know what it is, but it's a primal thing to it. It's like, I don't know how that verification button or that reds, greens, blues, why do they mean the things that they mean? If money wasn't green, would we spend it less? Because green means go, right? So everybody's willing to spend their money. Now everything's on digits and cards. What does that mean? The ones and zeros?
But it's a metric by which it's a metric of approval that someone else invented.
How
You
much
know
do you
that,
really love me? Do you love me in
yeah,
$5 or do you love me 100?
Yeah, that a think tank of a room, a brainstorming, going, what can we do? What can we do? And
Society's gone to shit.
a verification mark that somebody invented that has no monetary value, that seems so attainable and desirable. It's kind of like, it's like sharing your story and getting 1 million views. Why, what's your purpose? What's your motivation? What are you seeking out of this? And if you don't get what you're seeking, are you going to be disappointed? And you're then measuring your happiness. You're handing your happiness into someone else's hands, someone else's control, which is, it's like we have autonomy over ourselves. And I akin it to the analogy I use, like a lake. So you have a still lake and it contains water, and whether that lake is rough or it's maybe there's a bit of wave or swirl, or you're likely to drown in it. It's all external factors. So it's how much we allow the external factors to swirl up our lake, to upset our flow, our calm, So, and that check is like somebody else invented as an approval metric. that
Are
we're
you
so
are you so like, this is a major deep question. Not you, it's just question in general
yeah.
to like the world, to the point where you're so desperate that you're willing to spend $8.99 on 300 followers that you don't even know, but it just goes to your profile, but it's so appealing. That's the simulation that we're in. We're in this fucking dimension. I'm losing my mind over here because I'm over here just what this is why I've been off social media. I only post things or I message people because I physically can't deal with the grasps on this dimensional plane of existence where it just wraps around your brain and it's like, go on Twitter. What do you mean go on Twitter? You need a post you gotta like. Why does that person follow me? Well, they like my posts and I like theirs. It's an exchange for likes on posts, and if they follow me, I share their content, they'll share mine, and I'm like, oh, what is this digital deal? Where are we at? It's gonna create an era of psycho killers. I'm telling you, I keep wanting to call you Casey because I feel like I'm talking to Casey, but I'm not.
Yeah.
It's I start looking because I've been recently just diving into serial killer things after not only the Joker
Yeah.
movie was like the final piece to it all, but trying to understand how a person can come to the reality that they're in. And I'm realizing that it's everything around us is now consuming us so much to the point where we have people that are addicted to their cell phones who are suffering from depression at higher and higher levels because now you've opened up the door to exposure of the world.
And the more you share about yourself, the more you're opening yourself to the opinion on others on your life, and that doesn't justify trolls or social media abuse or anything like that. But how open do you want it to be? And like just to give an example, there, I shared the news about getting to the final of the New Voices Award 2021, and I incidentally, when we were off air last week, that was, I think I was talking on air about that particular book, the one between Haiti and Dublin. And like that, when I shared it, it was really, really nice to get the congratulations and get the ticks and the likes. And they were from a lot of people who knew of me, engaged with me. There was there weren't many random ones, and a few of us followed each other who were also listed. But it was exhausting at kind of the end of the day when you're kind of going, yeah, thanks. And, the whole lot. And, like, it's like good adrenaline is as exhausting as, negative adrenaline. And it was just funny, the perspective. Like, I was chuffed to get the likes, but did I measure against, I didn't get, I got 50 comments, but I didn't get 100. No, it's like, where there has to be a point of stop, and there has to be kind of, a non-addictive, where you have to be present in your life, what's happening now. And that's like the mindfulness. The only moment that matters is the one we're in, and the next one. And exactly, people are looking up from their social media and they realized life has passed them by, or someone's in their company and next thing they're no longer in the company. Oh my God, I've stuck to my phone. And you're kind of going, come back to the
We
present.
have
Just come back.
become the goldfish. I started realizing it. I was like, I'm like
Mm,
a goldfish going up to the top of the tank. I don't do anything all damn day in the fish tank, but then someone drops a couple flakes, which is a couple likes or a couple shares, and then I'm filtering up
yeah.
at the top, just feeding into it, feeding into it.
Yes. And you're going, yeah,
So that giant
it's
hand comes in the tank and moves objects around. You're like, holy shit. It's just
yeah.
all
So
over the place.
when did we hand our happiness over to others? When did we, yeah, our approval rating, when, when did our indifference become uh, this frantic need for approval from others who are probably, maybe living not as good a life, maybe a better life. Who knows?
Well, when you started deeming success on the basis of what you see on social media, it starts to become a game. And sadly, the more
Yeah.
followers you have, the more you're winning. And I don't think that's correct.
Yeah, and like we say, if you're a writer and selling books, you see how many those followers translate to sales, different things. And I've seen there with authors, and some of the best authors are, um, it's all word of mouth and fans and different things. And that's the way you build up maybe your engagement or that, or being yourself on it. But again, back to what we were talking about last week about the authenticity of self, where are we engaging with people just for a particular purpose, or are we genuinely interested in engaging with people for the sake of the engagement and getting to know them and who they are? There's a huge difference. It's when the engagement is there. Someone put up about going to a crime writing festival next year, and she was starting a group or a thread so the people coming to the festival alone could or for the first time would have people to engage with and meet, and they won't be flying solo on their own. And that's engagement with a purpose there, with a positive purpose, so that's nice.
The
So
only
there's that
quick
as well.
engagement you get now is if you put up a picture midst of your shot going into your freaking arm. Everyone's like I'm like, isn't that awkward for the person administering the whatever the shot? They're like, I just got it, guys, and they got a fucking SpongeBob Band-Aid attached to the top of the thing, and I'm like, all right, thanks. Now the next photo they'll post is something of like, my dog just died. I'm like, God damn, I don't want to go on social media anymore. Everybody's bumming the shit out of me. That's why I've been painting, and I put up a painting of something and that gets 20 likes. And I'm like, yeah. And then I put up an episode and it doesn't get shit. And I'm like, it still creates I'm still creating just in a different form, but people want to see the pictures. That's what social media is now. You see a
Mm,
picture, you double tap, you like it, you either like or you share, you comment, and then you just scroll past it. It's got to catch your attention though. It's like shiny keys to a child. You got to
yeah,
catch your attention.
there's a lot of apathy as well though. There's a lot of what is it where people are reading, enjoying, and they're not engaging. There's a lot of disposable information as well, because it's so fast and available that people are not mindfully reading, because I can save that
I've done that a
later.
couple of times. I've accidentally
Yeah,
liked
there
a
were
post where they said something. I was like, oh shit, I didn't want to like that.
or you save the post for later, and you're and you never go back to it. I've done that, where you save the post. Oh, that's very interesting. I save the post, never read it again. But it's just that information is like fast food. It's so readily available that people aren't reading it mindfully. They're not retaining the information because the information is too close to hand, that they don't have to go to the effort of retaining the information, and because it's there. So we're losing that, brain use, or that part of our brain where we
Attention
retain all of the
spans
information. Yeah, yeah,
going
yeah,
quick like an ostrich.
yeah. Or yeah, goldfish again. 3 seconds.
Goldfish, yeah. Yeah.
Going
That's a
around
that's
the
a good
bush.
analogy. Welcome to the second episode of Out of the Blank podcast, Casey. It only gets worse from here. uh,
Oh, that's very good, very good. But I think we have solved a lot of world issues. People's mindfulness, serial killers. So I think it's very constructive, very constructive.
it's like I'm a Gary V of motivation.
There you go. There you go.
Well, look, Marie, I appreciate you for doing my podcast again. where can
Great.
people find your books, links, anything? I'm going to link it in the description, but if you want to shout out your handles for anybody out there listening to
But
you.
it's Let's Talk Crime, Casey King on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn as Marie O'Halloran, which is my non-crime writing name. I'm on Facebook as Soul on Fire International Coaching and Mentoring and Casey King. So any one of those you would like. Books wise, not there yet. As I said, I was a finalist in the New Voices Awards, so we're getting close to it. So as soon as I have anything out, I shall be posting the life out of it on social media. So yeah, it'll be out there. You'll be one of the first snow, Rob. One of the first snow.
Well, I'm going to make sure I link it all in the description. You let me know when that post goes up. I'll
Fantastic.
retweet it for hopefully it gets a like, because I don't know. My followers don't like a lot of my stuff. That's okay though. I know somebody's listening out there because I check my analytics sometimes and I see it go up.
Let's aim for 5 likes. Well, 5.
5? Oh, that's a lot.
Yeah, and that'll be a high. That'll be our metric. So
somebody stole my mascot's Twitter. I have a mascot for my show, and somebody owns his
Right.
Twitter handle, and he tweets, but he only says rude things to me. I don't get it, but I don't know who it is. I hope it's somebody I know.
Maybe it makes him happy.
I'm good. It's all right. Thanks.
So we'll aim for 5 likes as the metric of our happiness.
I want to base the metric of my happiness off of just waking up out of bed and not hating my life. Is that a good one? Is that a good one?
That's a good one. That's a good one.
That's what you should just aspire, is that when your feet hit the floor, you don't think about your head hitting it as well. That's a good one.
I like it. That'll do.
Yeah. Gary V style.